There's this argument that I've heard a number of times. The basic argument is when people say I don't have the time for this or that, what they're really saying is I don't care about this or that, or I care more about other things than I do about this or that. And I will sort of agree that there's something to that. But I want to make some things clear that I'm going to talk about in the podcast today, which I'm giving the subject of taking my time. We're doing this obviously on the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host, I'm Kurt, and today is Monday, the 18th of April of 2022. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, the podcast, YouTube, BitChute, Cloud Hub, my Facebook page. That would be the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there. On Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com, on Minds, MINDS.com, on the Kurt's Religion and Politics group primarily there, on Parler, on Gab, on Twitter, or wherever else you happen to be following me today, whether as an audio or video thing. And again, the subject for today is taking my time, and I'm going to go ahead and go through my notes very quickly to sort of set the stage. And I'm going to warn you, this is a bit of a mic drop. But that having been said, we are going to take the time to discuss some other things afterwards. I recently saw a social media post by a person that essentially said, stop saying I don't have the time for this or that. You're really saying that isn't important to me, the particular thing that you're saying, that I'm saying I don't have the time for. I certainly understand the sentiment. And I can honestly say it's sort of correct. The problem for me is this. As a, quote, grown-up, end of quote, there are things for which I am responsible. I have to, for example, make sure my son gets food. Failing that means he at the least suffers potentially minor, granted, malnutrition. That means some part of my day is, quote, blocked out for, end of quote, that purpose. That will likely include washing dishes and other related things, right? You would imagine. I also have to eat myself, obviously. If I want to be able to support my family, I have to go to work, some sort of activity that generates revenue. Like it or not, that's 8 hours of my day, as a rule, 5 days a week, and that's at a minimum. My point should be obvious. Do I care more about my son getting food, me eating, or going to work than those things I proclaim I, quote, don't have the time for, end of quote? You could certainly make that argument. When I started to do the notes for this podcast, I had one that said something along the lines of taking care of my sons and making sure he's provided for trumps house cleaning. That's not to say I never clean house, just that I view it as a sort of ancillary thing rather than a primary one, that is, cleaning house. My son has decided he wants Daddy to play video games with him. I'm not saying I won't do that. In fact, I've begun to try to block out time for that very pursuit. But I will tell you, getting him to bed at night takes precedence over such activities. You can argue there's no such thing as I don't have the time. All you want. But you need to understand, changing the phrasing to that thing is not as important to me as this other, though I'm hard put to disagree, there's something to that. I have to agree with that, really changes little to nothing. On the other hand, you need to know that there are many things I would love to do for which I can find no viable time. I'm a musician when I get the time, but I very rarely get the time. Call me weak, more unreasonable, but between, again, making sure the kid doesn't die and even doing my videos, you can be sure the child takes a very definite priority. So, you need to understand one thing maybe above all others. Whether you think I don't care or I legitimately don't have the time really doesn't matter. The fact is, there are certain things that just aren't likely to happen and others that just absolutely must. And though it's true, part of that is that I'd be considered things like a negligent parent if I failed to do certain things, it is fair to say they matter more to me as well. Do I have the time and just not care, or do I not have the time? You decide, but know this, it really doesn't matter to me which it is. I just want you to know this. Okay, I'm done with my notes, so we want to get on with the discussion. As I said before, this is kind of mic drop right here. We're kind of in that place where it's pretty obvious what I'm trying to say. There are lots of things in my life that I would love to do, But if you want me to decide between whether or not I'm going to play a musical instrument today or make sure that my son has food, you need to know my son getting food will pretty much always win. If you want to know whether or not my helping someone on the side of the road trumps my going to pick my son up from school, because they're going to potentially count me a negligent parent if I do things like that very often, most of the time, the answer is my picking up my son from school matters more. It matters more. And then because I'm basically taking my lunchtime to go and pick my son up from school, because that's how my time works most of the time. I was just telling somebody I literally am up lots of times from like 5:15 or 5:30 in the morning until 11 or 12 o'clock at night, maybe if I'm lucky with an hour nap somewhere in there. That's my life. So if you want to say to yourself, it's not that he's trying to use that currency of time to the best possible advantage for everybody who's involved, you can think that if that's what you want, but you need to understand here and now, I'm not going to not feed my son. I'm not going to not get my son dressed. I'm not going to not get my son to school. I'm not going to not pick my butt up and get into work. I'm going to make it my business to do the things that I need to do on a daily basis in order for me and others to be where they need to be. And there are certain things that if you want to argue they're not really needs, you can try and make that argument. But the reality is this. When it comes time for me to decide again between my son getting food or me playing a video game, or me even doing my video that I'm doing right now, guess what? He wins. I made him food before I did this video. Now, part of that was to make it so that he wouldn't come barging in looking for food when I did the video, and I'll agree with that, and I understand that. But the point is, where you can argue, oh, well, you take the time to do the video. I have to be honest with you, and this is going to sound bad maybe, but I'm really trying to make it so that I transition from my, quote, full-time job working as a software developer to somebody who actually produces internet content. Maybe I'm not going about it right. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. But my experience to this point indicates that the people who are successful at that took 5 or more years to do what they're doing, and that is what it took for them to get successful. Now, I'm trying very hard not to take a huge amount of chunk out of my day to do that when I've got a job to do, and I know right now I'm getting nothing for what I'm doing for my videos. And I'm doing it because I really like it, which is one of the reasons that I want to transition to that. I'm not doing it because I hate it, but I'm good at it. No, that's the thing. As a software developer, I don't hate it, but the reason that I do it is I'm good at it, and people pay me to be good at that. If I have my choice, though, I would much rather do what I'm doing with you right now. That's what I'd rather do. My point in all of this, though, is whether you say, oh, Kurt, you're wasting your time here and you're spending your time there and you don't need to be, you're actually going to find that most of my day is not that way. Most of my day, I'm doing things that I have to do. Yes, I'll acknowledge that I take time out periodically to check social media and do other things. But you need to understand, too, that a piece of that is also in preparation for videos that I may be doing in the future. Usually I'm a day or two in advance. In fact, I can tell you what tomorrow's subject is, and I generally do that at the end of my videos. My point in what I'm saying with that is, in order for me to keep up on that sort of thing, I check out 2 or 3 podcasts a day. I do a little bit of perusing of social media. I think about things that I think it's important for people to say, considering that most of my stuff is intended to be timeless and is intended primarily to be cultural in nature, even though I couch myself as political and right-leaning in the stuff that I do. But the thing that I need for you to understand is quite simply that I'm really trying very hard not to spend my time unwisely. And that means that when somebody says to me, well, you know, Kurt, you could be doing these other things that you've just decided they're not things that are important to you or things that you want to spend your time on, I will agree that there's something to that. But I've got to tell you, too, that there's also something to the idea that if I spend my time on other things, there are important things that I need to get done that just won't get done. And to me, it's pretty important to have a schedule in what I'm doing, because that way I can generally hit things fairly quickly. And I've got to tell you that I get up in the morning most of the time, and I'm running from the time I get up in the morning to the time I get myself seated in my position at my work whether it's here at home where I'm working from home or whether it's out at the workplace, whichever it happens to be. So, am I telling you stories when I say that I just don't have the time for that? Or are lots of things taking my time that really make it so that I just am not able to do a lot of the things that I'd like to, much less a bunch of the things that I don't want to do? And I'm going to tell you something. A lot of the things that I have to do, they're things that if I had the option, in a sense, you could argue that I wouldn't want to do. It's not that I hate feeding my son, but if he could feed himself at this point, I would have him do that. And when I say if he could feed himself, for a large part of what he does feed himself. I do certain parts of the process, he does certain parts of the process. All of this said, though, keep in mind that when you tell somebody, when you say, I don't have the time for that, you are really saying, I don't care very much about this thing. Where you may have a point, you need to realize that's not as significant a thing as you might think it is. Okay, I need to go ahead and wrap things up. This has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host, I'm Kurt, and today is Monday, the 18th of April of 2022. As I say that, tax drop dead date for pretty much everybody here in the United States doing income tax on a federal level. If you haven't already done your income tax, hope you're getting something done like an extension today. Tomorrow will be Tuesday, the 19th of April of 2022. It is again bearing down on that middle of the work week for a lot of folks. Thank you for having been here, whether on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloudHub, on Locals.com, that's Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com, on my Facebook page, that would be the Kurt's Religion and Politics page on Facebook, on Minds.com, that would be the Kurt's Religion and Politics group there, on Parler, Gab, Twitter, or wherever else you happen to be watching or listening to me today. The subject for today has been taking my time. Tomorrow's subject is going to be who's hurt, and this is something that is born out of something that happened to me, my son, and my automobile last Thursday, and it made me want to talk on this subject. Hope you're having a good day today. Hope everything is going well for you, and hopefully we will see you again on Tuesday's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This podcast was created on Monday, the 18th of April of 2022. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching today's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back tomorrow to check out the next one. Remember, on various platforms, primarily Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub, and the audio podcast, you can subscribe to my content. For the audio podcast, you probably want to use Apple, Google, or Spotify. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. In order to find me on those platforms, you can go to the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub. You can also get to my content on Facebook by finding the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there. Minds, minds.com, where you will find me at the Kurt's Religion and Politics group, and Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com as well. You can look there. I post my daily video on various social media sites, really only about 3, Parler, Gab, and Twitter at present. I am at KP Schubert on each of them, and you can find me under them, and you can find the videos under me. You should be able to find my podcasts on Google and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's also on podcasts.kpschubert.com. That's podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. If you're looking for me on various of the podcast sites, you probably want to search Kurt's Religion and Politics, not the Daily Summation. Keep in mind you can subscribe to my content on various places that I put it. All constructive feedback is welcome. You can like, dislike, add a rumble, or give whatever feedback is available on any of the platforms that you can do such things. You can also add a comment on what I put there. Unless you're advertising or doing something that I believe will harm others, I'll leave your comments out there even if I don't agree with or understand them. I will try to let you know I've seen them when possible and may reply if I feel it's reasonable, appropriate, and possible, of course. Thanks again for viewing this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back again for tomorrow's as well.